Hello, my name is Vince. I was in air traffic control in the FAA for almost 37 years, 24 of those years at the Detroit Metro Airport in the tower cab. I've been a whistleblower since 2007 to the present. I'm going to discuss all those charges and how they tie in together. I filed charges over gross mismanagement, abuse of authority, and a specific and substantial danger to public safety. Given how air traffic has been in the media lately, I'm hoping that maybe some of these things that I bring to light possibly could be going on at other facilities, and maybe Secretary Buttigieg could watch this video or somebody from his office and start tying some of that stuff together and correcting these problems. The video is approximately 2 hours long, and I apologize for that, but there was a lot of data to cover. Hopefully, I combined it all together well. Any mistakes that I make or misspoke of, I will correct in subsequent postings. Thank you very much. Let us begin. So I said in the beginning, in the opening sequence, I'm going to be discussing one primary case from the past, from like 2007. But before I get started, I have never used this program before, so I'll be bouncing back and forth between documents. And it's very cumbersome for me because I'm not used to doing it. I'm going to be struggling with a little bit, and hopefully I won't make too many verbal errors where I have to correct them while I'm recording, but I'll try to move it along as smoothly as I can. So this particular case was from 2007. We were executing a converging runway operation, departing one runway, actually two, into a converging arriving runway. And the issue with it is if the aircraft that was arriving aborted and went around and climbed out, we were departing at that airplane with two converging runways. And if the spacing wasn't proper, it could get pretty ugly. The other issue with that, one of the runways, both of the pilots were on the same frequency, but there was the third runway, which was the second runway departing into that arrival runway, they were on a totally different frequency. They had no idea what was going on. They didn't hear the pilot saying, I'm going around or anything like that, because they were on a totally separate frequency. So I had issues with the weather minima. I thought they had the ceiling and visibility were way too low. The wind parameters, I thought there was way too much of a tailwind to be accepted, which causes more go-arounds. And the spacing between those arrivals, I had issues with that as well. So I filed a charge with the special counsel. AOV came in, and they absolutely agreed with me. They said that they were non-compliant with the rule. And they notified facility management of that when they were done with their investigation. They told them that in an out briefing. And that's going to become very clear about what happened here momentarily. So during all that, I was contacting a senatorial office, letting them know what was going on. And in between all this, the FAA from the facility and the region, they made the statement there at the bottom of the page. They said that AOV came in to observe the operation, and they told the senatorial office AOV did not find this operation to be unsafe, which is just not true. If they don't know the difference, but that there's no difference between being unsafe and being non-compliant with a rule, ask any controller. They'll tell you if you're not compliant with a rule, you're being unsafe. That's what the rules are there for us to follow. So that's what they told the senator's office. And as all of that started unfolding, they started finding issues with how they weren't properly telling the controllers how to do things, or their supervisors and briefings and guidance and stuff like that. And here AOV said, well, we didn't exactly tell them it was unsafe. We told them that they were being non-compliant, which again just blows any controller away that anybody would try to differentiate between the two, but they did. So when I found out about all that information, I went back to the senator's office and I told them about it. I said that's just not an accurate statement. And then I reported the managers for what they did to the IG, to I think the special counsel as well. I can't remember how the sequence went, but anyhow. And at the bottom of the page, you can see this is from the Office of Inspector General from the Department of Transportation, and they found the FAA, which those two managers, at a minimum disingenuous to the senator's office. So basically, I said they lied to him. They misled that office. And in those positions, I don't understand why you would do something like that. So I'm going to slow down here for a moment in reference to this. So why this is important, and the subsequent documents are going to show, there are two individuals that were involved in all this that are still within the FAA. The manager of the facility is now a high-ranking official within the Central Service Area. And I've been out of the FAA for about 3 years, so I believe the Central Service Area, of course, covers the central part of the United States. And they govern the districts within there and the airports. And he's a high-ranking official in that area, so he should really know what's going on about this case that I have active. The operations manager, at the time this was going on, was promoted to the quality assurance and quality control manager of the Cleveland district, and he is also the Freedom of Information Act coordinator for the district. And that will also come kind of clear in the newest charge that I filed, and you'll see how that falls into place, and you'll see why they made these statements here to the senator's office very quickly. So again, they talk about the we weren't getting proper guidance and proper training, and all the FAA did to those two individuals were they just counseled them. That's all they did to those two managers for not properly preparing the controllers and their supervisors to do this in the tower. They just counseled them, and lying to senator's office, they just counseled them. And then below it goes on to the disingenuousness of their statements again. And they forwarded this on to the Secretary of Transportation at the time. And he makes a statement about what took place over the counseling and the conduct. He says he had reservations about the adequacy of the administrative action, which was just counseling, for the managers who failed to prepare a timely clarification to the senator's office, which they primarily authored, right? Then he goes on to state that they were obligated to promptly provide the senator's office with a straightforward correction, and this did not occur for almost 7 months. Right, so here you have the Secretary of Transportation said, hey, you did nothing but counsel these guys. And then at the bottom of the page, the sentence begins, the Secretary indicated he would ask the new incoming administrator to examine these things and determine whether a formal disciplinary action is warranted. So he had concerns over what these individuals did, right? So then it goes on to the disingenuousness again towards the senator's office. And that's what they're talking about down there. This was now the special counsel is now addressing that. And then it was, they continued through more proper guidance and briefings. And here's why they were doing it. The operations manager, remember the gentleman is now the QA and QC manager, he knowingly allowed the non-compliant operation to occur. Knowingly. He knew what he was doing, right? And that's going to become more apparent here momentarily as well. And then they talk about the clarifying letter again to the senator. And the only reason that they went back to the senator's office is because I reported him again and said, look, this isn't proper, this is not right, this is not what's taking place. So the only reason they went back with the clarifying letter is because of my actions again, and that's what they state there. And then this, it goes on again with the non-compliant operation, the poor briefings we received, guidance, the whole 9 yards, and that's primarily what that page is for, just to hit it home, and you'll find out here momentarily why they were doing this. ATO safety, I forgot to mention this from the first page. ATO safety was also involved after AOV found out what they did, and they agreed with, and you'll see it in a subsequent document, they agreed with AOV that they were non-compliant. And this, again, goes into the safetiness and stuff like that. Now, this is why the manager and the operations manager did what they did. They told them it would be inefficient for DTW to increase spacing between aircraft. That means the arriving aircraft and the one converging runway, stating that if they increase the gap between arrivals from 4 to 6 miles to strictly comply with the paragraph, it's not even advantageous for us to run this configuration. right? So they put um, the capacity and efficiency of the airport above the safety of the pilots, the flying public, and they didn't care about the compromising positions they were putting the tower controllers in. Didn't care. It never even crossed their mind because it was going to impact the airline arrival rate, plain and simple. So then they went on. They talk about the improper briefings and the safety of executing the flow itself, and you can see some of the other some of the other issues on this page. But I'm trying to point all these out where they didn't brief us properly. But at the bottom of the page, they basically go on to state FLMs, which means supervisor. They didn't even provide them with proper training or guidance. It's just unbelievable that they were continue to do this. And this also goes into this where, oh, we're hitting gaps, it's fine, no, it's not fine, that the gaps were sufficient. And you can see where they talk to the different supervisors and they're all like, well, you know, we all got differing briefings from it. And then when they talked to the at least 10 of the controllers, they said that there wasn't even documentation within the briefing guidelines, which blows me away because there's always documents for you to read during a briefing. They didn't even provide the controllers with those. And then he goes on here again where through the Office of Special Counsel, it's not even advantageous for us to run this because of it was just inefficient, which again, just another document showing why they were doing it. This goes on to basically the same thing. When they were interviewing the controllers, they weren't properly being briefed properly, and it just was making unsafe situations. And back then we had a bunch of recordings that we showed them, and it was not pretty. And then at the bottom, that's what I stated earlier, the ATOS safety. When the ATOS came in, they found the conclusion of the AOV was absolutely correct. And it just, the reason this is going to pan out the way it is those gentlemen knowingly didn't brief people properly, knowingly ran the operation when they knew what they were doing was incorrect, and it was all over efficiency and capacity at the airport. That's all this was about. And anytime something went wrong, they blamed it on the controllers in the tower. Why didn't you do? Why didn't you do? Why didn't you do? Which is no way to run any sort of air traffic operations. You know, there was no repercussions for their actions other than to be verbally counseled, no accountability, no ramifications, no consequences for their actions. And they just kept deflecting it and blaming it on everybody else. Well, we don't know that non-compliance means unsafe. That just makes no sense to me. And with two of those people now in positions within the central service area, you're going to see where this plays out to the current charge that I have. So hopefully I painted a pretty good picture of that, and you'll see why it plays out to the current charge. I'll be back. I'm talking about a system called an ILS. An ILS is an inter-landing system that has two components: glide path information and course information, left and right for the pilots to fly. When they can't see the runway, they're on instruments when you hear stuff like that. We're primarily going to be talking about the localizer, which at normal airports, it's just straight in. It lines up with the middle of the runway. The antenna's off the departure end, and it's lined up with the middle of the runway. At Detroit, and one of their runways, they have offset localizers and straight-in localizer. The offset is exactly what it means. It's not positioned off the departure end of the runway. It's positioned to if you're landing on one particular runway, to the left side. So it's not going down the middle of the runway. I'm not going to get into minutiae why they're using it because I don't want this to drag on. But that's exactly what I'm talking about, is the offset localizer. And during poor weather, there's an area comes into play called a critical area, which I will talk about the weather minimums here shortly. But as you can read here, this is from one of the FAA's publications. It explains what it is. It radiates a signal, right? And it must be protected from aircraft and vehicle parking and the unlimited movement of surface and air traffic to ensure continuous integrity of the signal received by the user aircraft. They're pretty specific there. They don't mention the size of the vehicle, the size of the aircraft, the tail of the aircraft. It's pretty specific in there. And then the critical area is also intended to protect the ILS signal in a space from moving and stopped aircraft and vehicles. Again, doesn't mention the size of the aircraft or the size of the vehicles. And then in the controller's portion of it, when the visibility and ceiling drop below a certain level, we have to keep everything out of there. Nothing can be in that critical area. Now, the weather they're talking about is listed right there. That the integrity of the ILS course signals whenever the official weather observation is a ceiling of less than 800 feet or visibility less than 2 miles. Now, that specific statement is come into play later on. So remember that. Less than an 800-foot ceiling or visibility less than 2 miles. We can't have anything encroach into that area. And that applies to when an aircraft is at the outer marker or a fixed using that. Basically, it's when the aircraft starts descending. Or if they have the airport in sight, then something can be in there. They don't like it to be in there. They don't like that sort of be disturbed, but it can be in there. And then below that, within the same area, it goes into that, the same thing, the localizer critical area, which goes on to the next page where it says it again. A ceiling of less than 800 feet or visibility less than 2 miles. A preceding aircraft, arriving aircraft on the same runway that passes over or through the area while landing or exiting, they're okay to be in there during that. So on a straight in, what they're talking about is they land and they roll into that critical area, which I'm going to show you a diagram of that here shortly. They can roll into that and exit out of it onto a taxiway. And I'll show you that area. But remember that weather minimum very specifically. So the critical areas, and this is the runway I'm talking about right here, is 22 right, and it's going to also apply to the other end, but just for explanation purposes, I'm just going to show you the one flow. So the critical area, when there's a straight-in localizer, is this area here. We have to keep all vehicles and aircraft out of that that's not a preceding arrival. And you can see how large these are. These are all the runways have those. And this is for the straight-in localizer approach. Now at Detroit, for that specific runway, they also have an offset localizer, which is basically located just off this blue area down here on the bottom of the page. But look how small that critical area is in compared to a straight-in localizer, right? So what happens is these aircraft land on this runway, they exit, and they turn into the critical area. So that is going to become massively important later on. They can exit here, taxi down through it. And they're doing that above an 800-foot ceiling and above 2 miles of visibility, which a pilot still can't see the runway. If they're at those minimums, they still can't see the runway, and we're letting aircraft taxi through here, right? So that's the explanation for the critical areas. And then you'll see how this plays out later on down the road with how they briefed us and exactly what took place. I'll have a couple of videos to show you as well. I'll continue. So now we're going to continue on with the case that was closed out prior to the one that's active, both over the use of the Yankee offset localizer at Detroit. So the special counsel puts out a letter to the president and other entities after he has completed his investigation and his findings. And after reviewed the agency reports, my comments, and the findings of his office, they did not find the FAA's findings to be reasonable. And one of the things that took place during all this was, you're going to see dates from 2018 and 2015. A lot of things took place. In 2015 and in 2018, there were hotline calls that were filed against myself and other people in the control tower, and actually against the control tower. And in 2018 and 15, both of the investigations of those were done by AAE, audits and evaluations. And those are going to become very important here very, very soon, later on in this segment. So when you see 2018 and 2015, they're talking about those reports that were hotline calls and the reports from the subsequent investigations on those on the use of the offset localizer. So in 2018, during the panel, they determined that the having aircraft in the critical area, as you can see here, when ILS approaches are in use, and when they're talking about the Yankee localizer, undesirable as it has an effect on the ILS. But they said the effect has been deemed as an acceptable risk, and you'll see how the special counsel didn't agree with that at all. And then they go on to state the 2015 report. And that report is the hotline call that was made against myself and others in the tower. And that report, out of an abundance of caution, the manager of the radar room said, I don't think it's unsafe, but we need to further evaluate the location and mitigations in place. That's why they stopped using it. Also in that report, and I'm going to show the report in the next segment, technical operations, flight standards, and engineering services subsequently met several times. None of the parties were comfortable determining that the disruptions to the localizer represented minimal or no risk. So that's pretty important, because AAE has really, they make one determination in 2015 about the use of the offset localizer, and then come up with an entirely different rationale and findings in 2018 when they came in to investigate my special counsel charge. One of the things that they touted in the safety risk management panel was a weather mitigation, and AAE got that wrong. They did tout the mitigation, but they got the weather wrong. So when we're protecting the critical area of the localizer, the things I talked about earlier, you have to protect that when the ceiling goes below 800 feet or you go below 2 miles of visibility. AAE states that the panel determined that it could be conducted safely, 2 mitigations. One of them was weather. It says with less than an 800-foot ceiling and less than a 2 nautical mile visibility, which is a bizarre, it's a very difficult sentence, but it's not and, it's or. If either of those two, if you go below either of those two, you have to start protecting that localizer critical area. And this is what they touted as one of their safety mitigations. And the high tail aircraft, it was another issue which is going to become oddly important when we look over at the 2015 hotline call. And then a bizarre statement below that, several senior officials and technical experts agreed that after years of analysis and testing, comprehensive safeguards are in place to address all safety issues. Again, that's going to become really odd because in AAE's findings from 2015, they state the opposite of what they said there. And I had no idea who these senior officials were. And this is from the 2018 report that the AAE gave to the special counsel and to the Secretary of Transportation. Also in that document, they said they didn't find any new hazards from the 2018 SRMP. And then they get kind of bizarre. They say the rationale for not requiring further analysis is based on the fact that the SRMP in 2018, they agreed that although interference could occur, there were too many controls that would prevent a hazard. But the SRMP didn't identify the controls or mitigations. And then in subsequent documents, they start talking about the interference again from Tech Ops, Engineering Services, and Flight Standards. There would always be a disruption to the localizer anytime any aircraft transitioned through the critical area. None of these experts were comfortable providing an opinion that the disruptions of the localizer were within a safe tolerance. And we have emails and documents to show that, and that's what I provided to the special counsel for him to come up with that. Now, I'm going to get back to the specific document in a moment, but in the 2018 SRMP, they said we have to follow these weather minimums because that's one of our safety mechanisms. But in December of 2018, they rescinded that. Now, if you remember what I just talked about, the panel determined that those weather minimums were a requirement because they were for safety. The facility rescinded those orders, those weather requirements in December of 2018. The facility requirement to come off the Yankee localizer when ceiling or visibility drops below 800 or 2 has been lifted. At least he got it right, the gentleman that wrote this. He got that correct. But is it a facility requirement or is it a requirement from SRMP? Because if memory serves me correct, if it's a facility requirement, then nothing has to be done. They can just do it. But they specifically stated that that requirement was made by the panel, the SRMP. So that means if they change anything from there, they have to go back and do another one. So I think that's why they used the word facility requirement in that statement. And then here they go on again to talk about that 2015 response from AAE due to that hotline call. And they said that safety was a legitimate concern. Aircraft were losing and not receiving the localizer signal when aircraft with lower tail heights than originally thought were in the critical area. Thus, the procedure was discontinued until the FAA could resolve the issue. Now, mind you, between this statement In 2018, they did nothing to resolve it other than to put that weather requirement in there and then subsequently just rescind it. So then he goes on to start making statements about math modeling, and I'll show you how the math modeling comes into play. And he also starts talking about that there was multiple and confusing briefings issued to us, just like in the past report that I talked about in 2007. And he confirms that the localizer indeed is in an area where it reviewed that it was there. And then they go on to find about determined it posed a very low risk hazard, and the safety reviews concluded the FAA effective mitigation measures, which of course is we just looked at, they got rid of them. The report states that the FAA did not conduct any new risk analysis, but instead relied on previous analysis. That's not true. There was more analysis done, and we're going to hit on that in the next segment. Yet significantly, none of the experts who previously conducted or reviewed those analyses were willing to conclude the procedure was safe. So given all that information that I provided to them, and they reviewed, the last paragraph here is where they found out that where they made the determination that the findings of the FAA are just not reasonable. So the reason that we went back to the FAA and asked for more information, because the document we're looking at now is from the first report from AAE to the special counsel, and they're very vague in what they talked about. Again, that's why I went back and said they couldn't have made these determinations, or they didn't provide us any documents on how they did that. But one of the things they made a statement over that upset me and others was what they said about me. They said that during the interview process that the investigator asked me, did you have an opportunity to look at these documents from the informal process? And what AAE stated, I said, was I did not have time to read the agency's response and supporting documentation because I believed nothing had changed. That's a lie. That was an absolute lie, right? Then they go on to say, without apparent review by either the whistleblower or other subject matter experts, and continuing to allege that the agency hasn't resolved these things, right? So here they're saying that I didn't review them, the people that were helping me review the documents didn't review them, and that's just an outright lie. And the reason that's a lie, because prior to the investigator coming into the facility, this email was sent to me. Did you have an opportunity to review the documents previously sent to OSC regarding this matter when it was in the informal referral? And I specifically answered her, I did not have an opportunity to review these documents. I was never given an opportunity to do that. And why? The special counsel to the letter of the president actually responded to that, because that's not their policy. Their policy, OCS policy, is not to provide the FAA's informal response to me for review. And AAE should know that. So I had concerns over what exactly are they picking and choosing out of the investigator's report, because clearly I didn't say that. Or she would have never, she didn't bring it up during the interview because I answered it in that email. So here they had to then retract that statement. So from this point forward, it's the end of this segment, I will address how he came to these conclusions with all the emails, the hotline calls, their subsequent reports and stuff like that. I'll be back. So after they gave us a 2018 response to the special counsel, and they give it to me to review, and I made the statements of, there's a lot of things being said here that there's no documents for. So counsel goes back to the AAE and says, hey, what documents did you guys utilize? So they sent us, and I have it whittled down to 84 pages, but it was 237 pages. And a lot of it was a duplicate of 25 and 30 page documents that they just gave. I don't know why they duplicated them, but they did. So I took those out of there to try to whittle this down to something that's reasonable. And in the first page of the document, after review of the documents, the SRMP determined no new hazards existed. And I don't know how they can determine that. But the panel did not have to complete a risk hazard mitigation safety risk management decision, because they relied on the 2015 document SRMP document that had nothing to do with, there was nothing in there about math modeling or anything like that. So that's just kind of odd that they're saying that this particular document that they sent us, a 237-page document and everything in it, was used in the 2018 SRMD. And that wasn't the case, because I'm going to show you another document that was there that they did not give to the special counsel, and none of these documents we're reviewing right now, and this particular document, were given to them. So I don't know, at the time I just couldn't figure out what was going on until I got the new document, which is the next one we're going to review. So anyhow, again, I'm relying on notes here, so bear with me. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place. So from the 2018 SRMP, the assignees that signed off here, again, now it goes back to the manager that knowingly allowed things to happen, that lied to the senatorial office, is signing off on this as a good document. And now another person that's introduced to it, the radar room manager, is now a high-ranking official, either in the Central Service area or within the Cleveland District. I'm not real sure. But now he is also putting his names on these things as well. And you're going to see how convoluted this does get. And then in here, they actually do make a statement. These approaches were used for a few months in the summer of 2015 and stopped when it was discovered that aircraft exiting the runway and taxiing through the critical area on taxiway Alpha were causing interference with the signal. They knew it was going on. And again, from this document to 2018, when they started running it again, from the 2015 document, which we're going to get to next, between then and now, in 2018, they did nothing to change it. And then this is where the council gets the comment of, after a lengthy discussion, all stakeholders agreed that even though interference occurred, there were too many controls. So this is where this ball started rolling. And then these documents here are very interesting, because these are the people that were at this SRMP. NATCA is the National Air Traffic Control Association. That's our union. D21 is the radar room. Their safety, subject matter expert. The operations manager from the TRACON, a supervisor from the facility, and this is interesting here, 2 Delta, they're considered stakeholders, were at this meeting as well. A litany of other people. But MITRE was in there as well, and they are on the next document we're going to talk about. They're involved in the numbering of those things. And then another union representative. And then AFS 410 or 400 is what that originates from, is in the next document we're going to talk about as well. But they were at that meeting, more than likely to provide the next document I'm going to talk about. AFS 410, which is affiliated with this office here, was there. 450 from the same office. And this here is the air traffic manager from the radar room. We discussed him earlier, and again, he's at the region at some capacity somehow. And then it gets down to these emails that were circulating. Now, this is the stuff that was really starting to upset me, because the tower people involved in these negotiations weren't given this particular document and other documents. I'll point them out as we get to them. So this document here was not provided to us. And you can absolutely see back in 2017, before they ran this, and they said that they had this document at the SRMP, and it stated, with the offset localizer, the antenna arrays are positioned such that the critical areas encompass a significant portion of the adjacent and parallel taxiways. After exiting the runway, an aircraft will enter and remain within the critical area for a period of time. Thus, the opportunity for fluctuations in the localizer signal is increased as compared to a straight-in where aircraft exit the critical area as they exit the runway. They knew about all this, and there's going to be even documents from earlier than this that they say the same thing. And again, this enforces what I said. Complete protection of the offset critical area may significantly impact the efficiency and capacity increases expected at DTW. They didn't seem to have a huge concern about safety, the pilots, or what this was going to do to the control tower controllers. They are concerned about efficiency and capacity. And then they go on, and this is one of the documents just prior to that one in February. The one we just talked about was in March. It was also noted that the runway 4 left localizer, which is the opposite end of the 22 right localizer, they're both offset, would be significantly out of flight inspection tolerances for both course and alignment when Group 1 and 2 aircraft, DC-9s, MD-80s, A320s, Boeing 737, 757, presents in location 2 of the diagram, which is an exiting point on the runway, and we have a recording of this happening, right? So this information back in 2008 was not provided to the control tower. So when we're going to our meetings, it didn't seem, there were holes that we didn't know about because they weren't giving us these math modelings, right? 2011, in preparation for a safety risk management panel to review amended breakout procedures, Detroit TRACON, the radar, became aware of previous documentation regarding effects to the offset localizer. The math models indicate significant signal disruption under certain conditions. They did not share that with us. They found out about it, but they didn't share it with the people that they were going to be handing these airplanes off to, their sister facility, their union brothers. They didn't share this with us at all, period. Then they talk about the use of an offset localizer for 2 right, 4 left is required, thereby increasing exposure to the localizer critical area. The arrays are positioned, and they go on to talk about encompassing the portions of the taxiways more than the runways, more than a straight in. They talk about that again, and they did not tell us about that. In May of 2011, he concurred to flight standards, gentlemen, and this is where one of the ones that the special counsel was talking about. Large aircraft transitioning the critical area are more likely to cause navigational signal deviations in all weather conditions when the offset localizer is in use, because the localizer critical area encompasses, again, the taxiway. They know this was going on. 2011, never told us about it, the tower about it. Additional mitigation could be achieved by using a higher threshold to protect the critical area than what is required by regulation, right? So they not only did they not have a higher threshold for weather to help us protect it in the tower, they went down to the 800 or 2, and then they removed that, and now they run the operation down to the weather minimums for that approach, disregarding the critical area issue, and you'll see what the impact that has on the tower controllers crossing runways, forcing us to cross runways in poor visibility. And we're going to get to that a little bit more. But they totally ignored that. Again, we were not told about any of that. And then current, this is 2017. On August 5th, 2015, DTW commenced the utilization of the offset. Immediately upon activation, the report started, which of course, you know, it was going to happen. They tried a robust awareness effort. The anomalies continued. And this 2015 is also part of that hotline call. And the FAA knew about this. We did not know about the 2015 hotline call. So we were unaware that somebody other than us in the tower were concerned about these things. And then, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more, upon comparing anomaly reports with the ASDX data, questions arose regarding the impact of aircraft other than heavies and previously mitigated via the SRM panel, but not putting them over there, transitioning through the critical area. Those questions started coming up. And again, that was from 2015, not a word. Not a word to the tower whatsoever. And this is where the special counsel gets that from. Tech ops, any aircraft taxiing through there, through the critical area, are going to disrupt the signal. And then this, again, is one of the ones that the special counsel relied on, DTW flight ops inspection. They could not, safely say that this was okay. It's unbelievable that they actually kept all this stuff from the control tower. And then it continues down, and this is one of the math modelings that we didn't have, but this is what they gave us from the 2018 SRMP. At least they said they used them in there. Additional modeling of the Boeing 737 and Boeing 757 airframes resulted in significant reductions in course oscillations, but those results remained well outside acceptable limits. Tower wasn't given that information. We weren't told about that. The reader must note the alignment tolerance does not address course stability. Rather, it addresses the alignment accuracy required at the threshold. The magnitude, duration, and rate of oscillation may introduce excessive needle fluctuations in the cockpit and autopilot unlocks during coupled approaches. Again, the tower was not told about any of this. We weren't given those particular math modelings. And here's where it even gets worse back in 2015 when they already had this previous information. Upon receipt of this information, a meeting was held with D21, the Detroit Radar Room Air Traffic Manager, the Tower Manager, Airspace Procedures, TMOs, which means Traffic Management Organization, or maybe the officer, maybe that's, no, that's a specific person. D21 FAC Rep, which is the facility president of the radar room. I was the facility president of the tower. 1 DTWOM. Right? What's missing from there? Not one person from the tower. Not one. I wasn't offered to go to that meeting. I was the facility president and it was going to impact the people that I was representing. I wasn't invited to that meeting. The radar room guy was, and him and I had worked on previous things within the facility. He never said a word to me. Again, we were not told about these things, right? And what did they discuss? The arrival rate impact, right? Do you see anything on here where they're talking about safety? That we have to worry about safety? They talked about the anomalies, but they were talking about the arrival rate impact. So let's move on down the road here a little bit. Go to the next document. Now, these next documents, I'm going to go through it kind of quickly, but all of these will also be, not all of them, but I chose ones that we have video captures and stuff of, but these were being documented. I mean, the complaints that he had phoned all week and it was consistently showing him off course, difficulties capturing the foreleft localizer. He was left of the runway, would have to need to make a large correction. They came off of it because the visibility was dropping. He did not capture the Yankee offset localizer. And these were complaints that just repeatedly went on. And there's going to be a PowerPoint. I'll go over these things more. But I'm just going to kind of brush over them here. But these are things that they said that they gave, that they looked at in the meeting. He was not receiving the localizer for the offset. Pilots had issues with the localizer, questioning the localizer and the alignment. And apparently, they were saying, they were doing all those robust stuff, and still these things were still happening. They weren't able to pick it up. Aircraft reported that they were not receiving the 22 right offset localizer. These two aircraft both reported not receiving it. The last 6 arrivals had an issue with the localizer. And these things just went on and on and on. I mean, they just continued, failed to capture it. And these are the things that they're talking about. That these pilots continually reported these things. And you're going to see some things that took place that was really kind of unacceptable. So one of the things that we were talking about was when these things started coming up, and I didn't know about a lot of this stuff, I said, why don't you just move the localizer antenna so it won't encompass a taxiway, because this is the 2-2 right critical area, which this seems kind of small to me, and we're going to discuss that again later, but in comparison to the straight-ins. But this is what they're saying it is now, which is correct. But what they could do is move it. They could put it here, and it wouldn't encompass any part of the taxiway. These aircraft are landing this direction, so this is the only part they would really hit it if it would be an issue, but it's nowhere on any movement area. And this is the again a different angle of it. Looking, as you're landing, when you're coming in this way from a pilot's perspective, look how little any of this. It would take them less than probably a second to go through this, probably even less than that. But the localizer would be here, and it doesn't encompass any parts of the taxiway. So apparently somebody was discussing moving it, right? This is the current 4 left one. It's here, they're landing this direction, and when they turn off here, they slow down, especially in poor weather, to make this turn, and you'll see an incident when we had with that. And this would be if they moved it. They'd put the localizer here, and it doesn't encompass the runway, any of the taxiways. So somebody was looking at it, and this is from the pilot's perspective. This is where the localizer would be, and you can see that he would land here. He would barely even be in it, if, again, less than a second. So somebody was looking at this and did nothing about it. And then we go on to the math modeling that, again, we did not know about. And the gentleman that did this, after he sent an email, these are 2 different emails. This is on the 15th, and he doesn't change his mind, but he makes another comment. He says, hey, look, in reference to what I was talking about earlier, we need to make some other assumptions to this critical area stuff I was talking about. Now, right here are the critical area documents that we were never given in the tower. And they state, this gentleman states, and he's one of the engineers, the vast majority of aircraft landing 22 right and exiting proceed down Alpha and turn onto Quebec, which is some of the diagrams I'm going to show you later on, and you'll see what we're talking about. And he makes a statement. Aircraft that execute a long rollout have to make relatively sharp turns to exit the runway, probably undesirable to both pilot and ATC. And that's one of the things that the special counsel was basing this stuff on. And then this is a draft for the offset localizer math modeling. We were not given this in the tower at all. And it goes back to the Boeing 737's significant needle deflections and welcome in the cockpit, 3 times the available tolerance utilizing the offset localizer. The greatest impact of the localizer still occurs at the further from the array, from the antenna. This signal incursions both locations that would result in rapid and unacceptable course swings. They go on to state, slow swings may be tracked by an autopilot, and as the aircraft maneuvers close to chase the localizer center line signal, lateral separation will be altered. And what that means is the 2 guys that are coming in side by side, if this aircraft is on that and it's on an autopilot, it could interfere with the lateral separation between those 2 airplanes. That was kept from the tower as well. And if they had this information in the SRMP, why would they make a decision to use it? Okay. Then he continues, with that in mind, and in consideration of the results from the modeling effort, the following recommendations are offered. 22 right offset localizers should be protected at all times for large aircraft. And remember what it said above, what they encompass to be large aircraft, to include the Boeing 777 and similar size larger frames. Nothing was said to the tower. Not a word. And then we're going to continue down here where they're continuing to talk about this. And this is what we never knew. We never knew this stuff until I received this in 2018. And this stuff's all from 2011, 2010, 2015, 2010. Also, aircraft in a critical area will not block the signal, but may disrupt the signal. The aircraft on final will still have a signal. It just may not be the correct DDM value for the location on the procedure. So I don't know the difference between something being blocked and being disrupted. It makes no difference to me, because if you go back and read, and we're going to show you documents later on that show that they weren't receiving signals at all, full deflections, the whole 9 yards. So I'm not exactly sure what he's trying to say there. And this is going back to 2010, and they even had concerns. The ILS critical area for an offset localizer must be protected the same manner as a traditional centerline oriented localizer. Thus, the arriving aircraft must be clear of the critical area, not just the runway, before a succeeding aircraft is inside. Then it goes back to the 802 again. So they had concerns about this. And you're going to see what they did about the interpretation of that here shortly as well. And then this just goes on to more items where he was left of course. You're going to see the video of this one here. You're going to see the video of this one here, full deflection. But these, again, everything that they were recording. And you're going to see why these recordings and how this was all documented become quite apparent within the what do they call it? The hotline call from 2015. And that's just, again, the them lifting the weather restriction. Now these here, to the end of this document, are all MORs, mandatory occurrence reports. This aircraft stated that the ILS was erratic, QA reviewed. Now remember, the gentleman that said that he knowingly did that other procedure back that we talked about and knowingly was non-compliant is one of the people that's going to be reviewing these things. After his people within the building look at him, they send them on to him. So he knows about these things. And it just goes on. Say that he had a discrepancy with the localizer. They were more than 3 degrees off. QA reviewed. He checked in without the localizer frequency. It was advised on the ATIS. So this robust information that they were putting out to these pilots, they still weren't getting the information correct. QA reviewed. And it goes on. He went around a 2-mile final due to a full-scale deflection. We're going to have a video of that. QA reviewed. And these just go on and on and on. And this is after they started using it in 2018, knowing what happened in 2015. And that's basically what that document is talking about. So the next document is a document that was actually at the meeting. And this was a study done by AFS 400. And those were the gentlemen that were at the meeting. You remember back when the participants, they were there from 420, 450, whatever their numbers were, all from AFS. And the MITRE Corporation is also involved in these numbers as well. The funny thing is, like I said before, that first document we just covered, that was not given to anybody at that meeting. 3 people confirmed that. 2 from the tower, 1 from the radar room. We didn't get those documents because I gave them to those guys going, hey, did you actually review all these? Because we didn't see these in the meeting. But this document was at the meeting. And AAE did not give it to the special counsel or myself to review. And they said there was no new analysis done. This was done just prior to the SRMP in 2018. They knew about it, and it was at that meeting. In this report, it says, of these, all of the runway configurations fall within the bounds of the generic cases, except those at DTW, O'Hare, JFK, Denver, and Seattle. Additional scenarios were created and evaluated at these 5 airports due to the uniqueness of their configurations, which you'll find on here. We use an offset localizer. And this is the part that starts getting very disturbing. The specific airport configuration is placement of the ILS localizer antennas, right? So they looked at all these other airports that had an offset localizer. And when it came to Detroit, current closely spaced parallel operations approaches to runway 22 left and 22 right, this is at Detroit, utilize an offset localizer. However, due to signal interference from taxiing aircraft, straight-in approaches were evaluated in this study. So they did not math model, they did not evaluate the offset localizer because we taxied through that critical area, regardless of weather. Below 800 or 2 we didn't, but regardless of weather. If it's 802 or 2, we can go through there. And that's what they were concerned about. So they did not evaluate the offset localizer at Detroit. It's the only airport that didn't do it at. They only did the straight-ins. So for the FAA to say, and AAE to say, that there was no new analysis done, that's just not true. And they didn't give this to special counsel when they asked for all the documents who were at those meetings. Luckily, 2 of the people there, 1 from the radar room, 1 from the tower, gave this to me, saying this is what they gave us. And that's just abhorrent. So let's move on to the next document for this segment. Now, the council talked about briefings and how poorly they were done for the previous segments that I did, where they said the same thing, and they knowingly did that. What they were doing, it was the same thing. So here in this document, they're only talking about 22 right. They'll continue to vector until there's a sterile area for 22 right using the offset localizer. And then they use and or for here, that just isn't correct. But they didn't discuss 4 left, the opposing runway, like I showed you earlier. They can do this from both sides. And unfortunately, I went to them and said, hey, what are you doing? You gotta brief both. So what they did is they did a pen and ink change. And sorry for this, that I don't know why I scanned this so poorly. But this is from the manager at the tower and the manager from the radar room. Now remember, the radar room guy has now moved on. And a little bit of history on at the time, the manager of the tower. She was a radar room controller. She was our staff manager during a lot of these negotiations for the offset, a staff manager. She was a manager of the tower over at Willow Run and became the tower manager here. And I don't know, and you're going to see some of the stuff that's exchanged, how these people can be in those positions and not know the rules of the facility that they're responsible for, especially when you've been at 3 facilities and a staff manager at a large facility. 2 towers, a radar room, and a staff manager. And they had to do a pen and ink change. I asked them, the people that got this briefing prior to the pen and ink change, are you going to go back and tell them? Because the document I was looking at, they hadn't done it yet. Never responded to me. And this is the part of the briefing, or one of the briefings when we started doing it in 2018. And one of the facility rules were to tell the controllers to tell the aircraft taxi or proceed without delay through the ILS critical area. So they know that it shouldn't be in there, so we're going to tell the aircraft taxi faster. Whatever, it's snowing and it's slick and it's raining and it's poor visibility in the weather, they don't care about those things. The weather is inconsequential to these people, right? That is an absolutely ridiculous statement. Ground control should be cognizant of the position of taxiing aircraft. Well, no doubt that's their job. And then they go on to reiterate, and this is one of the things the special counsel uses, having vehicles and aircraft in the ILS areas when ILS approaches are in use is undesirable. It has an effect on the ILS. It has an effect on the localizer critical area. This effect has been identified and has been an accepted risk within the NAS, which is National Airspace. But minimal effort on your part can help to reduce the duration of this effect. Really. So they're not giving the controllers the proper tools to do their job other than taxi faster. That's unbelievable. So I during my briefing, I questioned them, like, what are you guys doing? This isn't proper. So they came out with another one. And what they did with this is the same thing, except they put pen and ink changes in again. And one of the things they added was that if there's issues, we have to advise the pilots to let their chief pilot know about any interference problems. That's not our job. That pilot's responsible for doing that. Why they're putting it on the tower to be having those sorts of exchanges in crappy weather with pilots is ridiculous. And then they reiterate, give expedited instructions regardless. I just don't understand that. And then it says, to protect for known deflection issues. They knew about all this, and this is a type of briefings we were getting. There are many other ones, but these are how poor these things are. When I went back again to management and said, there are pen and ink changes in these, are you going to go back to the people that got it like I did and rebrief them? Because they didn't do it to me. I was only found out about it because another controller who hadn't had the original one showed the pen and ink changes in this one to me. I'm like, I didn't get this briefing. So it's pretty pathetic. It really is embarrassing. But that's how they treat the tower guys. Now, one of the things that I also complained about during the briefing I was getting, I'm like, hey, look, we really should have some sort of hold short lines, and that's what this is on this document, and that's what these are here. I'm going to show you a better, clearer picture of it. But I kept asking for them repeatedly. And then finally, after they were conducting it from late 2018, they finally put them on there April 26th of 2019. And these lines are going to become something that was problematic. And you'll see in the next, I think maybe not the next one, the one after that. But here's a clearer picture. So when we're up in the tower working, we have this information on there so we can tell pilots, hey, the weather's gotten bad, hold short. So we know whether the pilots are holding short of the proper critical area, which again is going to be called into question here very shortly. But we'll move on to the next segment here in a moment. So we're going to continue on here is in 2015 when they were running the offset localizer and all the issues were popping up. And this is a PowerPoint that they put together The facility did. I'm not sure who did it, but they put it together to show what was happening. Now, you have to remember that October 24th of 2015 was the latest one that they did. Now, I'm going to just give you a real quick reminder. If you look at the localizer critical area, you can see where it's at, this turn right here. They're in the localizer critical area. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this PowerPoint. So this aircraft here was not able to pick up the Yankee localizer. This aircraft here was in the critical area. Just like the area I showed you, he was in that. This aircraft here could not receive the localizer. Same thing. There's an airplane in there. The exact things that these engineers were talking about and the stuff we covered earlier is happening right here, right in front of the FAA. And then there was another aircraft in there as well when he had issues with this after that. Same airplane, two different issues because there were two different airplanes that had passed through there on him, just closer to the airport. He said he was unable to pick the localizer up. And this is going north. This is going the opposite direction. This is the four left localizer, offset localizer. And if you remember, this is also what I covered. He's in that turnoff area, and guess what? He wasn't able to get the localizer. And then the same issue there. Somebody else rolled out when he was closer in. The exact same thing. There's an aircraft in that localizer critical area, and look what happened. And this is all above 802 that they're losing this out. So if the ceiling is, let's say, 1,200 feet and visibility is 3 miles, and they're further out, they're not going to see the airport anyway. So during the non-straight-in approaches with these offset approaches, this is what's happening. This aircraft here, the exact same thing. Boom, somebody in the middle of it. Boom, somebody in the middle of it. Twice on that aircraft as well. And a third time for that aircraft. He was having issues with it. And this just goes on and on. It shows that these aircraft, that there were aircraft within that critical area, there were other than the high tail or heavies that they were talking about. And this is going to become very apparent once we go on to the next document. But again, this is showing aircraft doesn't pick it up. He's having issues with it. What was this one here? It was reported fluctuations. There's somebody in the critical area. Somebody in the critical area. And it just goes on and on. And these are the MORs and stuff that I showed you earlier. Another one in the critical area. He reported fluctuations in the critical area. In the critical area. It just goes on and on and on. And they just keep stating this. So again, I'm only showing you the localizer critical area for the south flow, but if you remember, that's the one that's on the other end, that encroaching on that one aircraft that was exiting the runway, landing this way instead of this way. And then there were emails that were sent around to everybody talking about those MORs. So they not only were they MORs, they were also email exchanges over the same issues, and that's what this email is here. 2-dot deflection. There was something going wrong. The auto land. It just goes on and on and on and on. So this is just an email backing it up even more. And what this does now is it moves us on into that 2015 hotline call that was made against myself and others in the tower. I'm not sure whose name this is here at the top of it that's redacted, but that's somebody else that they reported. And there's a lot of stuff in here talking about how I don't like the arrival rates and all this stuff, and I'll keep this up as long as I can, and you can read the majority of it. But this was filed on November 2nd of 2015. Remember, the last date in that PowerPoint was October 24th of 2015, right? And what they stated, or who stated, because there were two people that filed this back in 2015. Now, mind you, again, I did not know this existed, the 2015 until 2018 hotline call came through, but I'm going to try to keep it in order so I can, make it as simple as possible. And these individuals state they were, I'm assuming the other person that they reported, were unable to provide a safety or efficiency reason for this, right? They have not yet actually presented a valid safety concern. Now, they filed this in November. They're part of the facility. How did they not know that information existed? It was all over emails. It was all over the facility. Then they have the audacity to say the Yankee localizer adds a layer of safety to our system. After the PowerPoint I just showed you. But they're saying that he does have a problem with someone attempting to manufacture safety claims because of an agenda. I more than proved that this is an issue. In 2015, when we were reporting these things and they would put them in his MORs, the radar room was putting them in his MORs, the tower was putting in his MORs. And then he again, well, at first, because 2018 he said relatively the same thing, but a large scheme of fraud, waste, and abuse, and should no longer be trusted by the FAA or the flying public after the actions he has taken. Not sure what he means by that, given what I just showed you, but it was very infuriating when I found out about this. Because not only did he attack me, he attacked other individuals as well. And the unfortunate thing about it, I asked that your office investigate the individual, me, and to see if you're able to identify a valid safety concern or efficiency concerns of his. So it says, and see if you were able to identify a valid safety or efficiency concern. Okay? And then they ramble on about me not wanting to use this runway, that runway, and it was just, I just didn't understand it. It was kind of bizarre the way this went down. And also within this thing they wrote up, they called me and others, well, myself and the people that are helping me commit this fraud, as recruits. And it just kind of blows me away that they weren't sitting down and talking to me about this, right? No idea why. At the time, I didn't have any idea why, but now when I show that the emails were there about the engineers, they didn't show us math modeling, how bad the math modeling was. The engineers didn't want us to do this. We should be protecting the localizer area better than what we are, the whole 9 yards. They knew that and we didn't. So I really didn't understand why they were attacking me and others, okay? So they go on to talk about, right here, that he has several other recruits have spent the last couple months trying to manufacture a safety issue that have unsuccessful up until this point. So I'm not really sure what he's trying to say there. I didn't manufacture anything. These things happened at the facility, validated and verified by other people other than myself. And the funny thing about this is, when you look at all these things I'm being accused of, we'll go to the findings of this particular hotline call. And this is pretty specific. It was answered December 9th of 2015. And here's how they answer them. Specifically, not sure who they blacked out, provided information and evidence that aircraft are losing and or not receiving the Yankee localizer signal when aircraft with lower tail heights than originally thought are in the critical area. As such, don't know who they're talking about there, decided to use the Zulu localizer, which is a straight in, only until air traffic, tech ops, and engineer personnel could address it and try to resolve the safety issues. Funny thing about that is, if you look at the top of this, this was dated and signed. This is actually AAE, but I can't. There it is at the top, Office of Audit and Evaluations. So they basically told them, yeah, I've proven this. There's a number of documents. This is one of the documents the special counsel had quoted. I'd proven this. So I don't know how they can say in November, making these accusations about me and all that. And clearly I did prove it. They stated that I proved it. As a matter of fact, should runway 21 left close due to FOD snow removal and the facility goes into staggered ILS approaches, don't know whose that name is aware that Detroit will show a slight decrease in efficiency. So instead of using the Yankee offset localizer for 2 runways or 3 runways, they don't have to introduce this safety issue into the national airspace. They could run staggered approaches, and they were told they could run with a slight decrease in efficiency, but yet they won't do it. As a matter of fact, the FAA has a class in Oklahoma City that they send radar controllers to be taught how to do staggers. As a matter of fact, one of their employees from Detroit, radar room, is down there now doing that. So why have they used this piece of equipment repeatedly with other options? They could relocate the localizer, which I showed in the previous segment. They could run stagger approaches, which they were told to do here. Or they can do RNAV approaches, which is like an ILS, but you can't interfere with it. It's a GPS type of an approach. Or they could get a waiver to come 3 runways straight in side by side with a waiver. So from this document here from 2015 and AAE basically agreeing with me, from 2015 to 2018, the FAA did nothing. So how I found out about this document. So in July of 2018, what took place was an aircraft was coming into flight check to check the offset localizer. And I happened to be working that day, okay? And I was on the desk, what they say. I was working the supervisory position so we could staff more positions to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. So how I found out about this is there was a gentleman from the radar room that approached me and said, hey, look, on that day and the following Monday, somebody filed a hotline call against you and others in the tower. And he specifically said to me, he goes, this isn't right. This something isn't right. That it should have never happened. So when I found out about it, I put a Freedom of Information Act in. And this is the information I got from it. So it goes on to the facility and who did it and everything. And they start into me immediately. And this is how I found out about the 2015 hotline call. Your office was notified that Mr. Vincent Sugent was actively trying to sabotage, again, the use of the offset localizers back in 2015. When I read that sentence, I went back to FOIA, and that's how I got the 2015 information. And then things started falling into place. AAE gave us the information that they said that they took to the SRMP in 2018. And then we got the CSPO document. Everything started falling into place. So then when I got the 2015 hotline call, it fell into place even more. So he falsely is claiming safety issues. I don't know how that's even relative anymore. This was 2018. In 2015, he was told that was an incorrect statement. It's that simple. I don't even know how these two individuals can make that statement again when in 2015 they told him they were wrong. And then he goes on to purposeful intervention, willful neglect of issues experienced by flight check airmen. He was experienced a loss of radar contact with flight check, and I don't want to get into the minutia of it, but he's basically saying that the radar wasn't set properly in a tower, so we were losing the target of the flight check, and that's where he goes on to say aircraft because of incorrectly set filter limits on the TTW, which is a tower display, similar to the one they have downstairs, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that they have downstairs. Which is bizarre because, for one, I don't know how to do that, but two, that'll be explained here in a moment. So they go on to state that I either change the filter limits purposefully and willfully allow the inspection to continue, knowing failures were going to happen because of the setting, and it goes on about the sabotage again. And then it goes on to, I'm very suspicious about what sort of service the tower was providing to the flight check aircraft. There was an exchange between the tower controller and a radar controller that I didn't think was very professional from either side, to tell you the truth. But what I did is I called on a telephone line, an unrecorded line, to the radar room supervisor and said, hey, I'm going to say something. Maybe you should look into this, but I don't want to make it a big deal. It should be more professional than this. All right. So what he did is he accused me of cutting deals on an unrecorded line. If you're making air traffic coordination, it has to be on a recorded line. That telephone was not. That was not the telephone call that I was making. Okay. And this is going to become apparent on why he is wrong. Then it goes, he has been stated before, there are not safety issues with this approach. Mr. Sugent is attempting to fraud once again. All right, and then the next sentence is very, very telling again. Wasted agency time and airline money due to lower efficiency operations. Money of an airline, not safety. We've already proven the safety issues are there and valid. All right, we knew that. And then his actions this morning prove his intentions do more harm rather than good. And this just goes on as who did it. And you can see the number 018 on here. And that was the number given to assigned by the hotline call. But then in the 018 one is a totally separate person. and it's almost identical to what the individual said above. So I'm not real sure how this was allowed to unfold. So the audit and evaluation, again, AAE was the one who had this, and they looked into it. They're the ones that investigated it. Then they go on to say here, he's believed that there was a ploy to control false information that was being passed to the flight check, and that's why we were working the flight check in an area that we normally don't do. Sabotage is the exact opposite, and I'm not real sure. It was just so bizarre when I started reading this, but it goes on again. It just goes on and on. How they spoke to me about this, and again, this was AAE that investigated. Now, a lot of the information has been redacted that I have, and almost everything that I received from the Freedom of Information Act was redacted. When this particular information I received, it was not all redacted. There was one specific individual that was left on there. His name was specifically on there, and his name is David Vosters. And he is, at the time, he was a TMU in the radar room. And now, I don't know how long after all this panned out, but now he's a supervisor of the traffic management unit. All these other individuals were on here. I'm the one who redacted that, these here. But David Vosters, the reason I'm leaving it on here is because the attacks were unwarranted, and I'm just not sure why they took place. They're accusing me of sabotage and messing with safety equipment for the FAA and all this bizarre stuff, and he was the one that doing this against me because he's been proven to be wrong. Okay, so the allegations are ran through, and I'll go by it step by step. DTW, which is the tower, allowed the controller who filed a complaint to be in charge of the operation while Flight Check was assessing the equipment. Huge conflict of interest. Yes, I am a whistleblower for going to Congress, going to the media, and going to the Office of Special Counsel. So yes, but a conflict of interest. I haven't shown anywhere along these lines that I have been unsafe and misled. Yes, have I gotten upset and made comments? Yeah, I have done that. But clearly everything I put in writing has been substantiated. So then they go on to talk about where he's mentioned the ploy to control false information and sabotage. That when you read this, okay, the interview with the D21 STMC, the supervisor that was in charge prior to Dave, indicated Mr. Sugent did a very good job as the watch supervisor. Their voice recordings indicated DTW and D21 were accommodating while providing service to the flight check crew. However, there were no signs of sabotage, and corrective action is unnecessary. I would never do anything like that, and that proved that part right there. And then here it goes on to the point that they were losing targets because I messed with the altitude filters in the tower on the displays. The really bizarre thing about that is there was no, right here it says, after the interviews and reviewing of voice recordings, there was no indication of purposeful intervention or willing neglect by me. The allegation is unsubstantiated. As a matter of fact, unlike the TRACON, who worked a bunch of different airports, not just DTW airport, but they work outlying airports where they have to adjust their altitude filters, the tower doesn't. It's set by the technicians. We can't even change them in the tower. And that's what goes on to say here. I kind of jumped ahead of myself. I either change the filter limits. Again, he's saying this is all a clear indication of my attempt to sabotage. And the findings say exactly that the only people that can adjust those in the tower are the technical operations. Unsubstantiated. DTW controllers are incredibly uncomfortable giving services to aircraft, the flight check in the areas we're in. Again, this was, that we were pointing out aircraft and we were doing things we normally didn't do. Right? He accused me of doing that. The funny thing about that one is when they came up with the findings, a review of the recordings indicate both DTW and D21 personnel were accommodating to the flight check operation. Additionally, Mr. Sugent never worked flight check during this portion of the inspection. Therefore, the allegation is not substantiated. Now, these are simple things that could have been taken care of in the building before making a hotline call. Right? Hey, can Vinny change those altitude limits? No, he can't. Only Tech Ops can. Hey, all they do is check to see if I was actually working that position when he accused me of that. He didn't do that, did he? Nope. And this is the one that goes on about contacted a supervisor on an unrecorded line. It's unprofessional and highly suspicious. And then the investigator goes on to talk about that. It was on a non-recorded line because it was about an exchange between two controllers. It had nothing to do with coordination of air traffic at all. Even though it was on an unrecorded line, it had nothing to do with what David was talking about. Allegations partially substantiated because I did make the phone call. And then allegation 5, attempted to fraud your office to lessen my workload. He is responsible for years of wasted agency time and airline money. Again, airline money. And then they go on to answer that particular thing there was, yes, I went to Congress, I did these things. And the interview showed a review of the recordings, no evidence to support the claim Mrs. Sugent had intentions to do harm. Therefore, nothing is validated. The investigatory findings indicate Mrs. Sugent acted responsibly without harm to equipment, procedures, inspection, or safety of the National Airspace System. That just blew me away. You can't imagine how infuriated I was. And they also talked about other tower controllers as well. And these were the guys I've worked with for years, and they're just solid. I just didn't understand why this had to happen. All he had to do was almost all of these things could have been taken care of in-house, and it found that it wasn't accurate, right? But this is where I'm trying to get at, where there's no accountability, no ramifications, none of that. You can lie to Congress. You can willingly, knowingly do things and not train your controllers properly. Any of that, and there's no ramifications. And this was allowed to happen 2 times. He was told once before that the information showed that what I was talking about different height aircraft, was correct. And the other infuriating part of it is AAE was involved in this hotline call and the previous hotline call in 2015 where they said I was correct. And what did AAE do in their findings when I filed the special counsel charge? What did they do? They attacked me. So why not, right? He was trying to get me fired, removed from public service over doing my job. And I just don't understand it. I don't understand what the reason was for it, right? I understand that they had all this information they didn't share with me. Maybe it was weighing on its conscience. Not my problem. They should have given that to us, right? They didn't do that. And this is the outcome of it, right? And then the special counsel finds out what he finds out, charges him. They use it again, and that's when I filed the charge that's currently under investigation. Hopefully, it'll be acted upon soon, and then I'll do another segment of this showing what was found there as well. So, I just didn't understand why Mr. Vossers did this, and why am I using his name? Because he talks about me being unprofessional and a saboteur, costing the airlines money, and he towed the line over efficiency and capacity and all these things. And meanwhile, they're the ones doing it. And he laid that out right here. Now, why did I get this unredacted? No idea. But it seemed pretty purposeful to me. And I sat on this for a long time before I did this. I was going to let this go until construction is coming up here soon at the airport, and I just wanted to make sure that this got out here, because if this was going to be used, he would be the catalyst to say, yes, we're going to use it. And I just, at some point in time, this has to stop. This sort of activity has to stop. It's that simple. I'll continue in a moment. Well, I'd like to start by saying, I know I stated that I was going to have some videos to play back. But the person that normally does the editing for me for all that and mashing together different types of media wasn't available. And I am really, really poor at doing that. I'm not any good at it at all. So I'm just going to give the MORs and the screenshots of them. And hopefully when the special counsel comes out with their determination of the current charge, I'll have those edited and can put it into the posting I'm going to do later on for that. All right, so let's get started. So this one here is the MOR where the aircraft was well left of course. The controller noticed it, and there was a vehicle on the runway during the inspection at that time. And you can see he's going this way, and he should be going this way, lining up with this runway, and here's the vehicle. So As far out as this guy was, this vehicle was probably right in this area on the runway, which is one of the concerns that the engineers talked about. The size of the area we're protecting is probably not big enough. We should be doing it during all weather. The lines we're using, this supports that, and again, it was ignored. And then we'll go on to the next one, which has to do with using the Yankee offset localizer during poor weather. And this was really bad weather. The pilot in question, he called, and he wanted to discuss the use of the offset during IFR conditions. He said he believes this is a safety issue here. Right? He said that on the frequency, and that's what it's stating here, that the crew talked to the control tower on the frequency. Subsequently, he did call the radar room, but the recording they gave me for that is absolutely horrible. There's a loud buzz in the background. You can barely hear anything, but the conversation did happen. So the people that are responsible for choosing that approach, instead of seeing the error in their judgment, basically said there were other approaches available to that pilot. He could have asked for if he felt uncomfortable conducting that approach. So the pilot clearly stated it was safety. They didn't care about that. They should have been making the proper call as controllers and managers and soups to avoid that, but they didn't. So it's the pilot's issue. Then the panel suggested upper management discuss variables impacting the choice using the Yankee offset or the Zulu straight-in. That's never going to happen, and it didn't happen. And here's the capture for that. This aircraft is clearly going this direction, should be lined up on this runway here, and here's an aircraft in the critical area that the math modeling showed and the engineers talked about and tech ops and those guys were concerned about. This is exactly one of the issues, and it was ignored. Then the next one is an aircraft that went around because he said he was had almost a full-scale deflection. And you can see here he is going in this direction, which is going to put him in conflict with this aircraft. Luckily, the aircraft, the pilot did start correcting back, but he's supposed to be lined up with this runway. Now, the only thing that was close during the scenario was this aircraft here. He was probably rounding the corner because this doesn't capture how far out he is. So this aircraft here was probably not critical area, one of the areas that everyone was concerned about, and it was ignored. It was never brought up. None of these reports where these aircraft are all over the place say anything about the use of the Yankee offset localizer. The next one is a conflict between two go-arounds off the two western parallel runways during trip approaches using the offset localizer in high wind conditions. And there was icing in the area as well. Now, instead of saying we shouldn't have been on it doing the Yankee offset localizer and taking some form of responsibility for that, and they didn't. They said the West satellite controllers did not comply with the LOA between the facilities. Now, the tower said something a little different than that. They went on to state that that the evening crew, for the afternoon crew for the tower, was briefed about the missed approaches because of all the go-arounds they had due to wind shear and gusting winds. Well, one of the things that they stated in there is a better option for this airplane here would be to give them a different altitude of 3,000 feet. Again, no mention that we should have been doing that and that the controller should have acted differently. Now, considering the history, they say they continue, considering the prior history of the go-arounds during the day, the panel is considering recommendation for the facilities to go over their LOA again and about the breakouts for that third runway during trips and utilizing the localizer. Never happened. So here they knew about this again. They knew about it was gusting. The people that came in for evening in the radar room knew this, and they still did it. And unfortunately, this is the outcome of that. Look how close these airplanes are. Same altitude, 4,000. Should have never happened. They should have never been put in this position running trip approaches. And the spacing here on final should have dictated they shouldn't have even been doing trip approaches. They should have been doing dual simul's and just running them 2.5, 3 miles apart. But no, they have to have this big spacing and run the trips. And here's the outcome of that when everything starts lining up. And then we're going to go on to the aircraft that got stuck in the critical area when the weather dropped below an 800-foot ceiling. Okay, now a little bit of background on this. If you remember, during the briefings, we were all talking about, please put lines on the ground radar so we can see. Please, 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 please. They finally did in April of 2019. But right before this incident happened, they did a rebuild of some kind of the ground radar. Once they rebooted it, those lines were gone. So we kept asking management, begging management almost, please put those on there to give us a fighting chance. Well, they didn't, and this incident happened. Now you can see here, the controller has this aircraft stopped. He said, hold short of the critical area. Now those lines aren't there, so we're not sure whether that aircraft is stopped short of it or not. And there's an aircraft right here. So he stopped them. But then, due to the poor briefings, the no lines, we talked about how they brief this and how these decisions are made, which they give the tower little or no input on this at all. He tells the aircraft to continue, and there's an aircraft here. Again, some sort of breakdown, no lines, poor briefings, the whole 9 yards. And then later on, the same time frame, all these aircraft are in that critical area with an aircraft here. Should have never happened. But during this weather, there are so many things going on, they should have never been running trips and utilizing that offset localizer in that poor weather. Now, what I'm going to show you here is there was things that were set in motion after that incident happened. And one of them was a string of emails between 4 people. 3 of them are very important. The person here on the bottom of the screen is the manager of the control tower at the time. Now, mind you, she was a controller in the radar room, the staff manager for both the facilities and setting up the procedures for the offset localizer in like 2012, 13, 14 range possibly. Then she went from that position to Willow Run as the air traffic manager. They have critical air over there. She should know about those things. And then she became the tower manager. The other 2 people is the quality assurance, quality control gentleman we talked about, the knowingly guy that is now the QA, QC, and the FOIA coordinator for the region. He's involved in this, as is the gentleman that's now at the region and the central service area, who was the manager at the time during this of the radar room. So they're discussing what took place. And this is how this string begins. If there is already a vehicle or aircraft in the critical area when the weather drops below minimums, can aircraft continue the approach? Do they just need to be notified of object in critical area? The answer is no. You ask any tower controller, they're going to tell you no. They have to pull that aircraft out on final. You just don't notify them. That's why the rule is there. Or the rule would just say, yeah, if they go into there, just notify the aircraft on final. That's not what the rule says. It says you have to protect that area. Then the other one chimes in and says, didn't we all get the explanation that if an aircraft is in a critical area when the weather drops, they can continue? No. I don't know what sort of explanation they would have received and from who. An aircraft on final does not get pulled off. Pretty sure that's what the official interpretation. There's no way that official interpretation exists anywhere. And it's going to become apparent when a 4th person chimes in from FA headquarters. Then one of the other ones kick in and say, this is kind of how I remember it as well, with notification to the aircraft on final that the weather has dropped below minimums and an aircraft has penetrated the ILS critical area. No. Again, you cannot believe how abhorrent these statements are from people that are in these positions. And the same people are the ones that are briefing the tower on what's going to happen and interpretation and rules, and they're actually having a discussion about this because they didn't put the lines on the radar and they didn't properly brief people. I pretty much know what they're trying to do. So then they're going on, and finally somebody from headquarters kicks in. Unless there are other documents that we are not aware of, the attachments, aware of the attached, are what we believe address your questions. This is in relation to the localizer protection area. Then he goes on to talk about the glide slope critical area and protecting that. And then the tower manager kicks in again. We all get that. But the main question is when the weather all of a sudden drops. The weather doesn't all of a sudden drop. It's forecasted to do that. They knew that this was going to happen, and they still ran trips and utilized the Yankee offset localizer. They knew this was going to happen. All other airports, when the weather is forecast to be below a certain visibility and ceilings and winds and icing and snowing, they control the amount of airplane, the arrival rate. If you remember, I mentioned arrival rate in an earlier segment. They reduce that for safety. Not at Detroit. Not at all. We're going to run these approaches down to the minimums. They don't do anything. It's like they are more concerned again about the money of the airlines, the capacity, and the efficiency, which just kind of blows me away. But anyhow, she continues, and the tower must protect for the ILS critical area. At the time of the change in weather, an aircraft is in the ILS critical area and others are on final. Must the aircraft on final be sent around or just advised of the situation? Again, I cannot believe that they actually put this stuff in writing. Well, finally, the gentleman from headquarters had enough. He sends them information that's highlighted, and this is stuff that I have already covered previously. And I didn't highlight this because I'm going to talk about all this blue area. And he had just had enough. Just to be clear, I am not a provider of official interpretation. That being said, I don't know what else you would do in the situation described. The paragraph that they're all talking about applies to the localizer critical area, and the section that indicates notification is in section 2, and it talks about the glide slope, not the localizer. Right? So he's just baffled that they're confusing these two. Then he continues, if the weather drops and you cannot, for whatever reason, meet the criteria as outlined in the 7110, which governs what we do in that yellow highlighted area below, with the additional restrictions outlined in HQ memo as it relates to the offset, and I'll get to that momentarily. What else can you do to protect the integrity of the localizer critical area? The restriction is there for the restriction is for it to be protected when the aircraft inside those fixes. If an aircraft has the airport in sight, you can let them land. If not, the only conclusion I see is to send any aircraft inside the final approach fix around until you meet the weather requirements. Just unbelievable. He's dumbfounded. I can imagine what this guy would sound like if he was on a telephone talking to these guys. And then he questions them, where are you getting that it's okay to provide a notification? Just because the 7110 doesn't state send the aircraft around, there has to be some logic applied. Logic applied. As you can clearly see, not just in this segment, but other parts of the segment, logic is out the door. Clearly, and this email is the epitome of that. If I can't protect the critical areas as required, what can I control? And what would be the aircraft is on final inside the final approach fix? I'm sorry, and that would be the aircraft inside the final approach fix. Unbelievable. Unbelievable that these people are making these interpretations. They're even questioning them. And they're seeing this stuff that's going on as a QA, QC manager. You're not raising alarms about using that offset localizer? Unbelievable. This really is an unbelievable email. But I'll continue. So one of the ensuing emails started when they said, okay, look, we got to put those lines back on there. And that's what this email is about, because they screwed up. They didn't put them on there. And this is what they should look like. So they're in contact with a technician that can put those back on for us. He goes, hey, we need to have these markings put back on, and this is why. And now this even more kind of pulls it in to what one of the technicians was saying, that we're not protecting that area. The lines aren't large enough. The critical area isn't large enough. He had concerns about it. These were the lines were at in one side of the critical area. Current location, here's the new location. They're supposed to be over this line. They were in the wrong spot the entire time. That brings into question the line that controller was holding those guys short of that wasn't there. Was that in the right spot? And I believe that's what those engineers were talking about. But look at this. And again, what happened? Nothing. We're just going to continue on as business as usual. And then this one here comes out again because of what took place as a briefing. If traffic is taxiing through the ILS offset critical area and then the weather drops below minimums, what minimums? The minimums they removed for safety, 800 or 2, or below the minimums to run the approach? They don't have any idea how to clarify or brief anything, and that's why things keep happening. It's impacting the tower, so who cares? That clearly is what I've shown so far. And then during all this and right prior to it, AAE puts out another memo. Here it is from AAE. And they talk about the offset localizer made trips possible. Not duals, trips possible. And this is one of the statements that the special counsel used in his letter to the president about we have all these multiple and redundant procedures in place. But then they put out these attachments, and this is how little people care about what's happening. So this picture here has a title of ILS runway 4 left location in critical area after development of Yankee. It's not after the development of Yankee. It's not. This is the ILS critical area for the current placement for the runway 22 right offset localizer, which you can see right here. That's what they're showing. Right, and here again, look how large this is for a straight in. Look how small it is here for the offset localizer. So here they have this label entirely wrong. Then the picture below it, ILS runway 4 left location in critical area prior to Yankee. That's also incorrect. If they would move the localizer antenna for the 4 left Yankee, this is what the critical area would look like. Not prior to it. The critical area for the Yankee is way back here. Remember how they roll into it landing in the north? They roll into it here. So they labeled that incorrectly. They just don't care. And then this is one of the areas where the special counsel said anytime an aircraft transitions that area, there's going to be disruption. But then here's another statement. The facility worked with systems engineering and flight inspection to expand the depiction of the ILS critical area. Expand it so they're only showing a truncated portion of it? What do they mean expand it? Are they saying that this is wrong? They need to expand this, what we're protecting for? I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that. Nothing was expanded. Of course not going to expand it because that's going to impact the airline money, the efficiency, and the capacity. I have no idea what they mean by this because nothing changed. Somebody was concerned about this and discussed expanding the depiction of the ILS critical area. Why would they need to expand it? It's a certain size. I don't think they're depicting it properly. And then it goes on here to have what this council said about the hazards and what they have in place to control that. And they repeat the 2 miles and instead of or 800 feet. And then the last paragraph, when the radar room is doing those monitor approaches downstairs utilizing that Yankee localizer, they have all kind of equipment. They have a guy that's staring at the 2 airplanes. They have these lines. They light up yellow if they're going to alarm being getting too close together. We don't have that in the tower. We just have our radar display. We don't have any of that. So if they're using the localizer and they're not doing their monitors in position, we're not going to be able to see as clearly as them that somebody's moving off the final. Plus, we have other things that we monitor, that we have going on where our scan is. We're not staring at that scope. So there are other things that we are doing other than watching a guy on final. And we have the equipment to do it, and we don't notice it until he's well off the final. So for them to say this is a mitigation for them in simuls, yeah, probably. Not a mitigation, but these actually are equipment required. They're not mitigations. These are requirements to even do that. But that's only for them downstairs. This does not affect the tower whatsoever. We don't have any of that up in the tower. So let's continue on where here's aircraft sitting in that critical area. They're stopped, right? So they're basically sitting right here. And it's radiating towards all those aircraft that are sitting on taxiway Alpha. And then you go back to say they want to change the depiction and how large they depict the critical area. Do they want to expand it? They're not going to do that because it's going to impact stuff even more. And then we're going to go on to the last thing. So for a straight-in approach, this is a critical area. And look how large it is. Again, it goes back to them saying we need to expand it. We're looking into expanding it. So the 7110 says that an aircraft that's landing can roll into this and exit out of it, and it's okay. It's written like that. We don't have to do anything to the aircraft on final if he's at that fixer inside of because the rule states that's fine because there's little change to the disruption to the signal. It's minor. It's probably even less than that. So what the FAA wanted to do in their infinite wisdom, the facility, they wanted an interpretation. Hey, can we use that rule for straight-in approaches for the offset? So what they want to do is they want to land here and turn into it, right? They're going to enter it. They want to say this aircraft landing here, he's not landing into the critical area, he exits into it. But they want it to be okay. And the FAA said, sure, we can do that. So they changed the from procedures at air traffic. They changed it. But the aircraft landing on 22 right that they exit at the end and turn to the east, they're an exempt aircraft, as if they were landing into a straighting and turning off. So they're saying it's okay to land here and turn into that. And I have clearly shown that an aircraft in this area, regardless of how he got there, is causing issues. So I can't believe that they actually gave him that interpretation. And this paragraph here just defines it going the other direction, landing up to the north. Now, I don't know if the person that made these statements had those issues that were shown in 2015, because they made this decision in 2018, right before they started running these approaches utilizing the offset localizer. I don't know whether they had all those issues from 2015, but they did make a statement: the facility may add additional restrictions to protect the integrity of the localizer signal as they deem appropriate. So they're making this interpretation, but if they find out that it's not working right, they put the onus back on the facility. Yeah, so what do you think they're going to do? Anyhow, so that ends this segment, and I'll be wrapping up here momentarily. Since everything I'm using are public documents, you can go to the Office of Special Counsel's website, type in these file numbers, and be able to see every document, email, and diagram I've used for these segments. Well, this is going to be the closing for this. I have a couple things that I have to take care of at the very end of this, but I'd first like to cover normalization of deviance. Now, I was given that statement quite a few years ago from a union friend that's involved in safety investigations and stuff like that. And he told me about that and told me that that was penned by Professor Diane Vaughn that investigated the Challenger disaster. And this is what she came up with for the normalization of deviance. And mind you, this is a slide from training that the FAA gives their employees, or at the time they were doing it, of course, during this time frame, because I got the slide from it. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they talk about this. And it was very impressive. It was very, very impressive what she did. Phase 1 of normalization of deviance. An action occurs outside of allowable prescribed limits without a negative consequence. Phase 2. Since nothing bad happened, no action is taken to prevent reoccurrence, and the previous limits are informally ignored. Phase 3. The deviation continues without consequence, becoming an accepted and expected practice. The margin of safety provided is gone. Phase 4. An injury or fatality occurs. Defensive statements may include, "It's never happened before," or "Everyone does it." This is outstanding, and this is what's going on at Detroit. And hopefully what I've put out here, all this empirical data that I put out, will help put an end to that. A couple things. When I was talking about the 2018 hotline call, I said there were 2 individuals that did it, and there were, but I showed the same number. But if you watch the video later on, I scroll down and the number changes. That's the 2 incident numbers that were assigned by the hotline people. So there were 2. And just remember that when the visibility or the ceiling dips, the tower's forced to cross an active runway in poor weather. Instead of utilizing the roundabout taxiway that we take them on, and that's what it was built for, to avoid crossing runways, we have to cease using it and cross an active runway in poor weather. They should be running staggered approaches instead of using this thing. Or, like I said, they could either move the antenna, they could do staggers between the western parallels, or get a waiver to go straight in side by side, or use RNAV slant GPS approaches that you can't interfere with them on the ground. The staggered approaches, the FAA actually has a class in Oklahoma City that actually one of the radar room employees is down there now taking it, a trainee, on how to run staggered approaches. So why they're not using that is beyond me. They're getting trained for it. I don't know why they're not doing that. And also remember the 7110, the critical area. It doesn't say what size vehicle or aircraft to keep out of the critical area. It says just keep them out of there. It doesn't say tail height, the size of the aircraft, none of that. And then back to the Mr. Voster scenario from the hotline call. If I was him, I would be wondering why only his name was released when there were 2 people that filed charges, and his was the only name that was sent out that filed the hotline call. There wasn't even a reference to that. It was just him. So After the special counsel releases the current findings, I will do another YouTube post, and I'm also going to cover the approach light systems at Detroit. They're having issues with those, the weather equipment and how it's being disseminated, and a Freedom of Information Act that I put in over 5 years ago over one document that involves my name, and it's been in appeal for over 4, and I have yet to receive it. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully I didn't make too many errors, and if I did, I will correct them. Thank you very much for your time.